What is the true price of a life? And what does a society decide to do with those it deems worthless? Throughout history, power has rarely been maintained by kindness alone. It has been cemented by fear. And nothing inspires a more primal, gut-wrenching fear than the public spectacle of a painful death. Imagine for a moment the roar of a bloodthirsty crowd, the smell of smoke and iron, the silent, looming presence of unimaginable instruments of pain. This is not a horror movie. This was reality for countless souls in the ancient world. Their stories are etched not in stone, but in the darkest chapters of human history. Today, we will bear witness. We will descend into the depths of human cruelty to explore the most horrifying execution methods ever devised. This is a journey into the heart of darkness itself, to understand not just how people died, but the terrifying message their deaths were meant to send to the living. If you're ready, follow me into the shadows. In a world without the restraints of modernity, where the divine right of kings and the absolute power of emperors was law, punishment had to be more than mere justice. It had to be a grand, terrifying spectacle. It was a complex language of terror, a brutal lesson carved into the flesh, bone, and time of those who dared to challenge the established order. Today, we will travel to the deepest shadows of antiquity, not to glorify suffering, but to confront it, to understand the chilling limits of human creativity when directed towards the singular goal of inflicting pain and asserting total domination. This is a meticulous journey through the engineering of agony, the architecture of fear, the most cruel and calculated methods of execution ever conceived by mankind. Our dark journey begins with the masterpiece of Roman terror, Crucifixion. To the modern mind, it is a symbol, but in its time it was a prolonged, bureaucratic, and brutally efficient process of public torture. It was never meant to be quick. It was designed to maximize agony and humiliation, to serve as a lasting advertisement of the consequences of defying Rome. The ordeal began long before the cross. It started with the flagellatio, a savage, pre-execution beating administered with a whip called a flagrum. This wasn't leather. It was a multi-tailed lash embedded with sharpened pieces of bone, bronze, or lead designed to not just sting, but to gouge and tear. The condemned man was stripped naked and tied to a post. The lictors, trained in their grim work, would strike repeatedly across the back, legs, and shoulders. The goal was to flay the skin from the body, to lacerate the muscle tissue so deeply that bone was sometimes exposed. Many victims died from this beating alone, going into hypovolemic shock from blood loss. Those who survived were a bloody, unrecognizable pulp, already hovering on the edge of consciousness. Then came the march. Weakened and disoriented, the condemned was forced to carry the heavy horizontal beam of the cross, the patibulum, which could weigh over 100 pounds, through the crowded streets to the place of execution outside the city walls. This walk itself was part of the punishment, a final humiliation under the scornful gaze of the public. At the site, the vertical post, or stipes, was already fixed permanently in the ground. The victim was thrown onto his back, and the real horror began. Contrary to popular art, nails were not driven through the palms, which would tear under the body's weight. Instead, they were driven through the wrists precisely between the two bones of the forearm, the radius and ulna, a spot known as the space of Destot. This location was chosen because a large nerve, the median nerve, runs directly through it. The sharp, sudden compression of this nerve by an iron nail would send explosions of searing, white-hot pain throughout the entire arm, a pain likened to lightning bolts. The feet were then fastened, often with a single iron spike driven through the heels or the arches, again targeting crucial nerve clusters. Now, suspended, the true physiological torture commenced. Death on the cross was ultimately a death by asphyxiation. With the arms pulled taut and upward at a 65-degree angle, the pectoral and intercostal muscles were paralyzed. The body hung in such a way that the diaphragm was constricted, making it impossible to exhale. To take a single breath, the victim had to push up with his nailed feet and pull up with his torn wrists, scraping his shredded back against the rough wood of the cross just to lift his body a few inches to relieve the pressure on his lungs. This action, of course, caused fresh waves of agony from the wounds in his extremities. Each breath was a conscious, excruciating effort. This cycle of suffocation and searing pain could last for days under the scorching sun. Death was a slow, agonizing surrender to exhaustion and suffocation. The Romans perfected this not just to kill, but to display their absolute power over life and death in its most gruesome form. But if the Romans were efficient industrialists of terror, the ancient Greeks were its sadistic poets. They combined cruelty with a horrifying artistry, and no invention exemplifies this more than the Brazen Bull of Phalaris. The story comes to us from the histories of Diodorus Siculus and Cicero. The tyrant Phalaris, ruler of Acragas in Sicily, was known for his mercilessness. He commissioned a brilliant Athenian bronze worker named Perillus to create a novel and terrifying method of execution. Perillus presented him with a life-sized bull, cast entirely in hollow bronze, with a sealed door on its side. The concept was diabolical in its simplicity. The victim would be sealed inside the bull's hollow chamber. A roaring fire would then be kindled directly beneath the brass belly, turning the statue into a giant oven. The victim would be slowly roasted alive inside this metallic tomb. But the horror did not end there. After the victim was fully wheeled, their shattered, limp body was often woven through the spokes of the very wheel they were broken on. This macabre tableau was then hoisted high atop a tall pole, left exposed to the elements, birds, and insects. In this state, the victim could linger for hours or even days, eventually succumbing to shock, dehydration, or exposure. The wheel, left on display, served as a gruesome warning to all who passed by. It was a message that the state's power could not only break your body, but would then display your broken form as a public monument to your own suffering. Perhaps the most psychologically terrifying and slow method of all was one reported by the ancient Persians and Greeks, Scaphism, often called the boats. Reserved for the most heinous crimes, like treason or patricide, it was a death that leveraged nature itself as an instrument of torture. The victim was stripped naked and placed inside two narrow, overlapping rowboats or hollowed-out tree trunks, one acting as the base, the other as a lid. Their head, hands, and feet were left protruding through holes cut in the wood, leaving the rest of their body trapped in a dark, confined space. To immobilize them completely, they were often force-fed a mixture of milk and honey to induce severe diarrhea, which would quickly mix with more milk and honey poured into the boat, creating a foul, stagnant pool around their trapped torso. This mixture, combined with the victim's own waste, would quickly attract insects. Flies would swarm the exposed parts of the body and the sweet, putrid liquid inside. Wasps and bees, drawn by the honey, would sting the helpless victim relentlessly. As days passed, the real horror began. The combination of warmth, moisture, and decay within the boat became a perfect breeding ground for maggots and other parasites, which would begin to fester in the excrement and eventually consumed the victim's living flesh from the inside out. Death by scaphism was an unimaginably slow process of septic shock, infection, and being eaten alive. It could take over 2 weeks. It was a death of total helplessness, a horrifying symbiosis where the victim was forced to witness their own consumption and decomposition in real time. Finally, we travel to the empires of the East, where the awesome power of nature was harnessed as an executioner. For centuries, rulers in India, Persia, and Southeast Asia used execution by elephant to demonstrate their supreme authority. These elephants were not wild beasts. They were highly trained, intelligent instruments of death, a terrifying fusion of immense power and chilling precision. The mere sight of a massive bull elephant calmly obeying its mahout's commands to kill a man was a powerful demonstration of the ruler's dominion over all creatures. The methods varied in their cruelty. Some elephants were trained to perform a slow, crushing execution, placing a single foot on the victim's head or limb and applying pressure with immense, calculated weight. Others were trained to use their sharp tusks, sometimes fitted with blades, to dismember, disembowel, or slice the victim apart. Some were even taught to break the body by dragging the condemned by the limbs or using their trunks to swing them against the ground or a post. This was not just an execution. It was a public performance designed to inspire awe and terror in equal measure, proving the king's power extended even over the largest and strongest of nature's creatures. These 5 methods, the calculated suffocation of crucifixion, the sadistic artistry of the brazen bull, the ritualistic dismantling of the wheel, the biological horror of the boats, and the raw, bestial power of the elephant, transcend mere execution. They were sophisticated theaters of terror. Each was a deliberate, public performance designed to communicate an absolute truth. The power of the state or the ruler was total. It could dictate not just that you would die, but precisely how long it would take, and what spectacle your suffering would provide for the masses. To study these practices is to undertake a necessary, if horrifying, exercise in memory. It is to stare into the abyss of what human beings are capable of when power is unchecked, empathy is extinguished, and cruelty is codified in a law. We look back on these shadows not to revel in the macabre, but to feel a profound gratitude for the fragile structures of justice and human rights we have built, structures that, however imperfect, stand as a bulwark against this kind of sanctioned savagery. They are a hard-won legacy against the darkness of our past. Remembering this history is our first and most important duty to ensure it remains buried there. If this deep and dark journey through the annals of history held your attention, if it made you think and feel, then share this video with others. Your like and comment truly help this channel grow and allow us to delve even deeper into the fascinating and often untold stories of our past. And most importantly, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. You won't want to miss our next exploration into the forgotten corners of history. Thank you for watching. Until next time.